Hi, everyone. It looks like we're right at 1 o'clock on the dot. Welcome to OK Boomer, Tips for Bridging the Multi-Generational Workplace, a Millennial's Perspective webinar with Spencer Stump. I'm Kelly Gunkoff with Kirkwood Corporate Training, and I'm pleased to be joining you all today at this webinar. And I wanted to let you know that even though COVID-19 has changed many of our workplaces today, that Kirkwood Corporate Training is still here and working to help support you all during this challenging time. If you guys have any training needs or if you workplaces need any support during this time, we are happy to assist and do anything that we can to help you guys through this difficult time and support you and your teams. If you have any questions or if there's anything we can do to help you, feel free to give us a call at Corporate Training. Our phone number is 319-398-5623. Again, thank you guys for taking time out of your busy afternoons to join us for this webinar today. I do want to let you know that we will be featuring the chat throughout this webinar today, especially at the end if you have any questions, or during the session if you have any questions. I'll be monitoring that chat. A couple of you I've noticed are having some mic issues. So with the webinar feature, you are actually muted. And so at any time, if you would like to talk, just send me an IM at the Kirkwood Corporate Training here and I can unmute you. Or if you want to just type your question in and I can politely try to stop Spencer and have him answer your question, or we'll wait till the end and ask it then. So please feel free to use that chat feature. There is the chat and the Q&A. I'll do my best to monitor both, but I'm going to encourage you to try to use that chat one as I can watch that one more closely. Without further ado, hi Spencer, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours and we look forward to learning more about you before we jump into this topic.
Okay, thanks for having me here, Kylie. I really appreciate the opportunity. This is something that I'm really interested in teaching about and getting the message out to others, so I appreciate the opportunity. Let me share my screen, so bear with me here for just a moment, please. So we are going to be talking about this, tips for bridging the multi-generational workplace. So as you're here, you're probably thinking, who's this guy and why is he teaching this? Well, again, my name is Spencer Stump. I'm very interested in teaching this because I want to figure out how to borrow a line from Adam Grant, I study how to make the workplace not suck. We spend a lot of our time at work and I'm incredibly interested in finding ways to make work better. My undergrad is in business management from Iowa, and then I just finished up my last MBA class from Iowa as well. Go Hawks. A little bit more on my background. I've been working with Kirkwood continuing education for 2.5 years, corporate training for a little over 6 or 7 months, and then University of Iowa as a supervisory excellence trainer for the last 6 months as well. And so these are the avenues that I'm using to get out these messages to help figure out better ways to work. And then when I find something that's really interesting, then I want to get out and help as many people as I can. And what I'm really interested in teaching this stuff is I've always been interested in learning more about different generations, especially engaging millennials. As you can see, this is my picture of my first training I ever gave, Better Times with Better Haircuts. But I've always been interested in this stuff because there's been, especially coming out of undergrad, there's a lot of stuff, for lack of a better term, clickbait on the internet about here's how we treat millennials different, or what do they want, or how do we deal with boomers as they age, or what do people really want in their workplace, and sectioning people off by that. And I got kind of caught up in it. I will maintain that my stuff has always been a little bit more toward the center of, hey, we're not that different, but it does definitely come with the, it definitely implies that there's a difference between us even with that title. So that's why I'm interested in teaching this today and getting things kicked off.
Great, Spencer. Thank you so much for the intro of yourself. I would know that all of us today attending would love to know what drives these perceptions of generational differences rather than maybe what we experience in our life.
Sure. So I'll jump ahead a little bit. The generational differences are, actually, can you reframe that question a little bit, Kylie, or restate it?
Sure. You know, what really shapes are these ideas that we are so different across these different generations?
Sure.
What's driven this idea, I guess, throughout the time?
Yeah. So it's basically the idea of it's a set of other people. We've always, whether it's generations, whether it's just people from different countries, different cohorts, or people that live or work in a different department that you do, there's always that perception that other people are different in some way. Generations is one way that we manifest that. And I guess I'll back up a little bit and give some more information on what the generations are and how many there are in the workplace. First one, this is information from Pew Research Center. Before I get into any of this, I want to mention that when you go and look up stuff for generations, it can be a little bit different across the board. And that's based largely because a lot of different places define what the start and end points for generations are in a different way. And because of that, it's hard to get apples to apples when defining, okay, how many people are in this? What are their ages? What are their attitudes? That kind of thing, especially when it comes to percentages, for example, in the workplace. But this is what I like. Pew Research Center, in my opinion, does a very good job at this. They're really great at showing their work and in going back and correcting if they say, hey, here's what we said 2 years ago and we're updating it with this. So this is what I'm going to use for my example of generations, especially in the workplace. And there are 5 generations in the workplace right now. Gen Z, which as you can see, ages about 7 to 22, millennials, Gen X, boomers or baby boomers, and then the silent generation, also known as traditionals. Again, you're going to see different terms for these thrown across at different places, but these are the ones that people kind of gravitate toward. Again, I'll hazard some information about what percentage of these are even in the workforce. So Gen Z is about 5% of the workforce, millennials 35%, the largest. Gen X is 33%, boomers account for about 25%, and then silent or traditional is about 2%. Again, catching this, that information is from 2017. Obviously, that's changed as time has progressed. Also, with the massive changes that have come from COVID-19, it's tough to say that those percentages may be even remotely close.
Great. Sorry about that. I jumped ahead a little bit.
No, that's all right.
Really excited to get. So it's really interesting that we see these differences, and it's curious that we identify so greatly with these differences. So what drives some of these perceptions of generational differences that we're experiencing today?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, that thinking that other groups are different than ourselves. But the research has shown that actually there's no real substantive differences between generations. And as you're hearing that, you might be tilting your head sideways and thinking, well, what the heck is this guy talking about? Just like everyone else that I've told this to. It's kind of best crystallized by Peter Capelli, who's a professor of management at the Wharton School and author of Managing Older Workers. There's no evidence that 35-year-old managers today are any different from 35-year-old managers a generation ago. And that seems like a wild statement when you first hear about it, but as you start to dig into this, it becomes more and more clear. One of the best research that I've found on this so far has been from Costanza et al. And in 2012, they performed a rather impressive meta-analysis on generations to see if they had any effect, any generational differences had effect on workplace outcomes. I know that's a lot of academic talk there, but so I'll boil it down a bit. First, a meta-analysis is a study of studies. So instead of taking one study or one slice of information and analyzing it, they took several slices. They go out to the field and say, what has been already done? What studies exist out there? And then they comb through them to see which ones are really academically reliable. And then they compare across them to figure out, okay, what are the main takeaways that we can get from this over time? And so with theirs, they analyzed 265 studies, selected 20 of them that they considered of very high quality. And even across those 20 studies, they had a sample population of not quite 20,000 people. So pretty reliable. Their main takeaway is that, again, there was no difference between generations and workplace outcomes. So their main workplace outcomes they looked at are job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and intent to turnover. So one that we commonly hear, like people don't care about their jobs as much if they're younger or older or whatever, or that young people are more likely to leave their jobs, and they're just not finding that to be true. The other finding that they had is that there's actually more variance within the generations than across them. So meaning that within my generation, I'm a millennial, I'm 27, I should have disclosed that earlier, but I'm 27, I'm a millennial, a younger millennial, and there's more difference with me and my peers than there would be with me and someone who's a boomer. Now, again, I'll couch that by saying you have to time lag this stuff. If it's just me versus someone who's 65, of course, we're gonna have different experiences, we're gonna be different people, but how different was he when he was 27, and how similar would we have been at that point? So remember to time lag that. But to give another example of how we're different than people within our generation as opposed to across it, I'll give the example of my wedding party. So I've got 7 individuals, including myself. Of that includes, again, I'm 27, should have been married in June. We pushed it out a year, so should have been married. I've got a younger brother who is 2 years younger than me. He already is married and has a house and has renovated it. No kids yet, though. My another friend I have is married, has been married for a few years and has 3 kids under the age of 3. Yet another friend has been married for a few years, has 1 kid. And then I have 2 other friends that are in new-ish relationships and, in my opinion, not close to being married yet. So very different life stages from like 6 or 7 people who are within 3 years of age of each other. We just go through different life stages, and life stage is different than the year in which you were born, again, based on that example. You can learn more from that by giving an example of when I say think of someone who's 40 years old, what do you think of? Do you think of someone who has a house and kids? Do you think of someone who maybe is just now buying their first home, or what do you think of? And how do you know what that person wants? Well, you can't know what that person wants until you ask. So it's kind of a big takeaway. If you have questions, again, throw them in the chat. I'm sure you may be scratching your head right now, like everyone else I've told this to. But the main takeaway from that is that the differences aren't real, the tension is. And so as we get into that, why does generational tension exist if there are no real differences between the generations? And that's due to a few different things. The first one being stereotypes, second one being meta stereotypes. And this is what the research is borne out from here as well. I want to get this right. I want to say it's Kelly Pledger Weeks does a great job on this, so does Rebecca Knight and Peter Capelli. Stereotypes and meta stereotypes. So stereotypes are what we assume about others, basically, especially if we perceive them to be a member of a certain group. So I perceive someone who's older to be a baby boomer, and so based on that, I assign certain characteristics to them based on that group, which may or may not be true. Meta stereotypes would be what other people think about us. So I'm a millennial, and I may assume what baby boomers think about me as a millennial. They don't, maybe not even specifically about me personally, but they see me and they think, oh, okay, I'm younger. He must not be as experienced, or he may be really good with technology. It could be positive or negative, but we just have those assumptions. And so those two assumptions mix, and they create a problem that isn't really there. And to help illustrate that, I've got this. So which one of these circles looks bigger? Upon first glance, you may think it's the right one. Or you may be a little bit more contrarian and think, oh, obviously it's a trick, it's got to be the left one. In reality, they're the same size. And that's the effect that stereotypes and meta stereotypes have, is that they distort things. They make it look like there's a bigger difference than there actually is. And that's because we start to assume other things about other people, or assume that other people are assuming things about us. And it creates a real problem with this. Example that I can give from this is that makes it kind of real is I've got a boss at Iowa who is fantastic. She's really, really brilliant. But every time we get on a Zoom call for our weekly huddle, she if anything messes up on Zoom, she's like, oh, I just can't figure this out. She's a part of the boomer generation. She's like, I just can't figure this out, or I'm just no go with technology. And she assumes that she's not able to do these, to learn this stuff, or that she's not good with technology. And that's just not true. She's very capable. She leads an organizational effectiveness and learning and development department. She knows that she can learn things really quickly. She wouldn't be doing it otherwise. But it has that real effect, because we can assume things about ourselves and about our own generations as well. It can be a very meta stereotype. I assume that other millennials are turning over at a higher rate, or that they don't care about their work, or that they're lazy or whatever. And it may not be true, but we have assumptions about our own generations as well. And the effects of this can be really, really damaging, not only with the example from my boss's boss, but McCausland, King, and Bartholomew actually did a laboratory experiment that I found really interesting as well about this. And so what they did is they wanted to examine the effects of these stereotypes and how it may actually play out in the real world and cause an actual problem. And so what they did is they had trainers try to teach others to perform a function through Google Chat. And so what they did on here, if I can get this right, is that a trainer and a trainee. And of these trainers and trainees, they modulated their voices to make them sound younger and older. So younger, they had them sound about 23 years old, and older was about 53 years old. So again, changing these out. But they also had someone listen in, and this was the task performer. This was someone who followed the instructions that the trainer gave, just as the constant to see what they would create, what their instructions were like. And they found that whether the trainer was young or old didn't matter as much, but whether the trainee was old, if the trainer perceived the trainee as being older, they gave worse instructions and had lower expectations of learning. And so that had an adverse outcome on the trainee and the task performer, as borne out by the task performer. So that's really scary to me, where you have that perception about someone else, whether you realize that implicit bias about them, and it makes you treat them differently. And we can go through that with the generations. That's one that's, in my opinion, is very, very salient. I think about anytime my dad calls me up and says, hey, I've got a problem with my email, and I just groan and think this is going to be terrible. And it may not necessarily be true. He's a smart guy. He can learn things quickly if he wants to. But me having that attitude and assuming that it's not going to go well doesn't help him at all. What questions, if any, do we have already, Kylie?
So Susan was just mentioning that, a lot of what you're talking about is really falling into ageism, right? We're all kind of guilty of putting somebody in a bucket based on that age versus recognizing their value on who they are as an individual.
Absolutely. That's definitely a huge part of this. One of the things that I want to get this right, Kelly Pledger Weeks did a great study on this, had not quite 300 people from different generations force rank what they thought was meaningful in their work and how important it was to them. And she found that every generation thinks that they are in work for the meaning, that they want meaningful work, but that the other generations are just there for the money and they don't really care and they don't try that hard. So everyone thought that about themselves and about other groups. They all thought, I'm here because it matters to me. I want meaningful work, but those guys are just sellouts. And while their definition of meaning varied a bit, it was just astounding to find that, like, to help reinforce, like, yeah, everyone thinks everyone else is bad for some reason just because they're part of a different group. Otherwise, you may be thinking, so what can I do about this, or what can anyone do about it, whether you're a manager or not? The main takeaway I want to give you for this is to not base your training or your management style around generational differences. It's just not a solid construct. There are different things you can work on. If you're like, hey, my team doesn't communicate very well, and you perceive that it's around generational differences, okay, well, there's a few things you could do. One, have a training on interpersonal communication, not just interpersonal communication across generations or whatever it may be. And then tell them that it's not real. Like, tell them, sit down and explain with them, talk about stereotypes, meta stereotypes. One of the best examples that I saw of an activity for this is literally having everyone sit down and list out what the stereotypes they have about other generations, and then list out all the stereotypes that they have about their own generation, or that they think others might have about their generation. And then once you've got those two lists, go through them and find people that don't fit the bill, that go across it. So think about someone who's a baby boomer, a 60-year-old IT manager who's just quick as a whip, who understands it totally. Sorry to use the technology all the time, but it's very salient right now. Flip the thing, you could say, for me with technology, I do relatively well with technology. I can do multiple regression with Excel, but at the same time, my fiance had to show me how to use our printer that we've had for over a year. So examples like that bust the myth, basically. And the more you think about it, the more you can find exceptions to the rule. Then the last thing is treat people as individuals. Don't just assume that you know what they want based on their generation. I would say don't base certain things like your recruiting efforts specifically around generations. Like, oh, what do they want? Do they want, we were joking before this one started, like getting a ping pong table for your workplace to make it seem cooler is a lot cheaper than adding good benefits or increasing pay. But what do people actually want versus what they say that they want? And then ask them individually. If you don't know them that well, go get to know them better. Don't assume based on that. Again, going back to my example of my wedding party, we want very different things despite being very close in age. Like my buddy who's got 3 kids under the age of 3, if there's anything, if he was working somewhere or being recruited somewhere and they said, hey, we've got a great daycare program for our employees and their kids, he'd be incredibly interested in that. Right now, I am not yet married and I don't have any kids, so it's not going to have the same effect with me. That kind of thing. So figure out what they want, and remember that's going to change over time as they enter those new life stages. It could be very different now than it is in 2 years or in 6 months, whatever it is. But get to know them individually. So I guess my last 2 main takeaways, which again incorporate the other things, but I wanted to bring up a funny picture because I like it, is don't lump people together. It's easy to see other people in just large groups and not want to be able to tell them apart, but they are individuals. Seek them out, draw the lines. Every time you're in that situation, you're like, oh, all young people are, stop. You're probably thinking about one person who you had a bad experience with, or 1 or 2 people, bad experience, and then you're projecting that onto other people. And that's just not fair to the other people. And it can, again, as McCausland et al. Showed, it can actually lower your performance, your engagement with these people. One of the other things that I saw as a good recommendation is to actually pair up people from different generations. So if you can get them to provide mentorship, or if you can get them in a partnership and say, hey, here's our main goal. Remember, we're working together. How can we learn from each other, as opposed to like, this person can't teach me anything, or they're not listening, or they're stubborn, or whatever it is. Like, go through your stereotypes, do that exercise, but then remember, like, have them actually pair up and become teammates. My last takeaway for this is to tell the others. Again, this information can be a little bit shocking. Everyone I've told it to is kind of, again, turn their head sideways and be like, are you sure about that? I'm like, go look for yourself. I've got my receipts on the next 2 slides. You can go check it out yourself. But remember this, because you're going to come across different times when you see like, oh, hey, should we do a training on how to get millennials, or how to work with Gen X, or how to work with new Gen Z employees that are coming in? What do we do? And remember that a lot of it is noise. Based on the stuff that Costanza et al. Showed, caveat for them is that, again, it was done in 2012, so Gen Z was not a part of that study, that a lot of it's noise. Treat your people well, ask them what they want individually. That's the way to do things. Again, it's going to come up. People are going to look at you sideways when you say, hey, that's not what we should base it on. But check it out. If you've got some dissonance over what I'm telling you, I encourage you to check it out yourself. And I think you'll be pleased with what you find. Kylie, I think that's all I've got, other than I've got my references, my receipts. If people want those, I can send them out afterwards as well.
Yeah. I think we did get a question here that I would like you to answer here in a second.
Okay.
One of the things that I wanted to say too, that I think that I hope it resonated with others as much as it resonated with myself, which is just think about how much your own values have changed over time. What was important to you when you were graduating high school is very different than what it looked like after you got a few years in the workforce, whether that was after you went through some technical education, or if you were able to just jump right in, or if you went to a university. We've all had different paths to get to where we are today. And it's very interesting in just the last, as you get older, what changes in your values just based on your life experiences, like you said. I thought that was a really cool point that I think we can all relate to, in recognizing like what we valued at 18 is definitely not necessarily what we value at 27 or even 47, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
So Jared in our chat had a question on, can you give us some tips specifically on how not to lump zebras and people together? How can we really start to recognize people as individuals and not just as their generation?
Yeah, that one, that depends a lot on context. If you're trying to recruit, or what the situation is, if you're trying to train a certain cohort of people. But the one that I think of it in the workplace, and it's thinking about, who do you want to connect to? Is it someone in your workplace that you're like, I just don't get along well with that person, or whoever it is, or like I start having assumptions about this person? Sit down and start like putting it on paper in front of you. Is like, what do I actually know about this person? What can I say I for sure know about this person? What's actually assumption? What have I asked them about? That kind of thing. Trying to delineate, even if you do it once or twice, you start building that muscle, I guess, to say like, oh, okay, that's right. I am making a lot of assumptions here. And it's kind of a natural thing to do. I mean, your brain, it's a heuristic. It makes it easier. Your brain doesn't want to use all the cognitive power to look at each individual zebra, so to speak. It's easier to say there's zebras over there. However many, it doesn't matter. They're black and white. Yes, that's great, but each of them has different stripes. So go take time to look into it. It's tough to do, but if you can stop yourself, or if you can give yourself kind of a cognitive trigger on something, one thing that's, it's guess kind of disparate. I'm not sure if it applies exactly here, but I've seen where people put specific questions on checklists, and they have that are triggering and say like, what do I actually know about this person, or what assumptions am I making? And even just like having that line that you have to go through, like for a job interview or something like that, that could be a trigger for you to kind of stop and reset your thinking.
I love that idea of challenging your own thoughts about maybe somebody, especially if you're having a challenging relationship, especially in the workplace, about what do you actually know? What have you heard them say? And not just maybe how you felt walking away from a conversation. Stick to the facts, try to remove the emotion, and really just zero it in. But then also, I think it's always good too. We see so many groups and companies doing all these personality assessments, strengths finders, DISC, colors training. We all talk about these individual components that make us us, and then we tend to fall back on these old tried and true thoughts of, well, you're a millennial, or you're a boomer, or you're a Gen X, or whatever it may be. And we tend to just kind of lump them together when we don't understand. So I love that idea of challenge yourself and really lean into it. If we have any other questions, feel free to ask. And I love this, Selena, thank you. So Selena just said, good job, Spencer, and she really likes the points. And if anybody has anything else they'd like to add, maybe you have a perspective of how you were able to battle making assumptions about a person, please let us know. This is a great time to share as well. And then as Spencer's going through his references here, Spencer, did you have one that you thought would really be a good read if someone's like, I'm not sure I believe this, or I'm not sure I agree, I want more information? I know you have a lot of references here, but is there one that really stands out as a really good resource that you would recommend to them as a leader? And
Yeah,
then I
I
have
want
another question for you.
to. It's the one by Ferry. I'm not sure I'm not pronouncing that name correctly, but it's by Science for Work. They're really good. They're a group of industrial organizational psychologists. That's one of the things that I had heard some of the stuff, but then when it keeps coming up on my radar of like, okay, this is good. Other people who are trustworthy are saying this, and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's right. Let's build something out around this. So I like it. They usually summarize some pretty heavy academic stuff in a more palatable way, so to speak. So that one's great. And then again, it links to the actual source if you want to go to it and explore the academic part of it yourself, but they do a great job in my opinion.
Yeah, so Robert just asked a really great question. Robert, I apologize, I'm just gonna read it straight from the screen. While we can't generalize the generations, how can we use the data to help us learn more about people as individuals? And then he threw in an example of using the data about experiences people went through during their lifetime and how it may have formed their personality, their demeanor, etc.
That's a really good question. There's a ton of stuff out there about that. I don't have a great answer for that one. Because my general belief is like, again, it's good to use that, and here's their life experience. For example, I think of my grandparents and how they grew up during the Great Depression, and so they've got habits about like how they hardly spend money. They had like growing up, they had a huge garden at their farm, and so they lived off of that. And like their frugality could be very well explained by that was part of their formative years, is that huge life-changing experience.
Mhm.
It could be good, but I take almost all that stuff with like an entire salt shaker at this point, because again, it's easy to say, okay, how can we form this about them? But just ask. Go talk to the specific people you're looking for. Again, that it takes a lot more time and effort than, okay, we've got 300 employees who are within this age bracket. How do we design something for them? It's tougher to do, but I'd say, yeah, take the time to ask, because your group may be very different, again, even now than it was 6 months ago.
So Selena just jumped in too to say, yes, just ask, you know, how to help, or help me understand how, tell me more about your perspective. I think those are all good questions. It would be interesting to see if there is a lot of data out there, research about the life experiences and how workforces can use it to help lead their teams more effectively, right? You know, Robert also brought up the example of, we want a ping pong table, but we really want better benefits. So I think too, it goes back to that we all have different values, and how do you identify the values that recognize or align well with your company, but also meet the broad spectrum of all of your employees.
Yeah, it's tough. You want to cater to everyone, but it can be tough when they say they want different things. At the end of the day, people want a good job with benefits. They want a manager who helps them, who doesn't micromanage, who supports them in their growth. Simple things like that, it's easy to do window dressing. And I can't remember what the study was, but one of the biggest things that people wanted out of work was sunlight. They wanted to be in a workstation that they had access to like a window or sunlight of some kind. And as you might be doing, when I first read that, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's crazy that it's this high up on the list, but here I am. I've got a window right in front of me, and it's nice. And I've been in workplaces where there were no windows, and that was a little bit less nice over time.
Yeah,
Some things like
absolutely.
that.
So Robert also added, Robert's really hard hitting today with the questions. I love it.
Yeah.
What they don't know, how to verbalize what they really want or mean. How might we approach that? I'm assuming as a leader, how do you help them identify what's important to them?
Yeah. A few things. One, watch behavior, because I'm sure younger people are going to tell you certain things. That's the one that I think of, like, for it's more salient in my mind of like Gen Z coming to the workplace. What do they actually want? Watch behavior and what they seem to value over time. If you ask them directly, what do you want? It's probably not going to work out. As you point out, they may not know how to crystallize what they actually want, because no one's asked them that before. But be creative about how you ask as well. That can help bring that information out over time. The other thing that I enjoy them a little bit too much probably, but the articles that come out that say like, here's what Gen Z said that they wanted, and here's what it actually is, or here's what's coming out over time. And you can kind of see what, for lack of a better term, the first wave has done right or wrong. That's the example I use, like for the ping pong table. And they're like, oh, I thought I'd like this, but actually I'd like to be able to like shut off my computer and not feel like I'm at work all the time. So maybe they want flexible work arrangements. That we're all getting a great test of that right now. But maybe they also don't want to feel like I'm plugged in all of the time, or that I'm responsible for replying at whatever hour of the day. So listen
Yeah,
a little bit to their complaints too.
great insights there. If you guys have any more questions, we'll have another opportunity here for the next couple minutes. Otherwise, we'll start wrapping up. Spencer, thank you so much for your time today and your recommendation on a reference. So I just want to thank you guys again for your time today. I know it's not easy, and I just want to thank everyone. I know with COVID-19, a lot of people are being asked to do a lot of very challenging things personally and professionally. So hang in there. We're all in this together, and thank you again for being here today. If you had any questions after today's session, or if you're at your desk and you're thinking, oh, now I've got this really great question, or this other topic or this other idea has really kind of been percolating, feel free to reach out to Kirkwood Corporate Training. We'll be happy to try to help answer those questions for you. Or if you would like to bring Spencer in or any of our other trainers, whether it's on this topic or any other topic, feel free to reach out to Kirkwood Corporate Training. Our phone number is there at the bottom, but it's 319-398-5623, or feel free to reach out if you have a salesperson that you've already worked with, feel free to reach out to them. And we'd be more than happy to introduce you to Spencer or work with you in whatever you may need during this challenging time. So thanks again, guys, and I hope you all have a great day.